Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 70 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Chicago Blackhawks, in which the Sharks have lost 5-4 in overtime. And it was just 5 years ago where I would have watched a game like this, where the San Jose Sharks take a 4-goal lead against the second worst team in the league just to blow it and end up losing to them in regulation, and I would have been irate watching that. I'd have sat here in front of the camera talking about how unacceptable and inexcusable a performance it would have been from the San Jose Sharks. It would have been the end of the world, even during the regular season, to see a loss like that. It had been a 5-minute video. I wouldn't even talk about any of the players, that it would just be assumed that they were all terrible, and that would be the end of that. But it is a different era for the San Jose Sharks. It is a different time for this organization. At this point, a 4-goal deficit, while it is maybe particularly unique of the year, it is not the most embarrassing thing that has happened. The Sharks have lost 2 games in which they've given up 10 goals, and they both came in a row, one after the other. There have been many other embarrassing moments and losses for the San Jose Sharks, that this is just another one to add to the pile. On top of that, with who the Sharks were actually up against in terms of their opponent, this is actually the preferred outcome. Obviously not exactly how it happened. You'd rather not have a 4-goal lead that you then completely blow and get completely embarrassed in front of your home fans, but a loss to Chicago was pretty important in the standings race as we move ever so closer to the end of this season and to the draft lottery for the 2024 entry draft. The Sharks came into tonight's game down 4 points to the Chicago Blackhawks. With this final matchup between these two teams, the final 4-point swing possible in the standings. Had the Sharks won this game in regulation like they seemed so destined to do early on, they would have found themselves just 2 points, a singular win behind Chicago in the standings. Now at that point, it would have been important to mention that the Chicago Blackhawks do have the tiebreaker, at least currently, over San Jose, so even a singular win maybe could have still edged out in favor of Chicago, but it would have been cutting it very close, and not something that the organization really wanted to get into. However, with this overtime loss, not the most optimal situation as it would have been with a regulation loss, but the Sharks now find themselves a pretty solid 5 points behind Chicago, where even if the Sharks were to win 2 more games than the Blackhawks down the stretch here in the last dozen or so games that both of these teams have, the Sharks will still find themselves securely in last place by a single point. And so this is technically a benefit for San Jose, even if it doesn't really feel like that in the moment. Moving on to how this game actually played out, it starts off exceptionally well for the San Jose Sharks, just as the matchup about a week ago against this very same Chicago team did. The Sharks come out, they score 2 goals in the first period, both of them coming from Thomas Bordeleau, one on the power play, one at even strength, to make it 2-0 San Jose at the end of the first period. And like I said, this was the same exact score that the Sharks had after the first period in their previous matchup against Chicago. In that one, they also allowed the Blackhawks to roar back in and end up winning that in regulation. This time around, in the early parts of the second period, the Sharks would pad their lead with 2 goals from Fabian Zetterlund, again one of them being on the power play, to make it 4-0 Sharks. And at this point, it seemed over. It seemed like the Sharks would be untouchable, that they had learned from their mistakes in their first match or their previous matchup against Chicago. They wouldn't allow the Blackhawks to crawl back into this one. But the Sharks, they always find a way to surprise us every single time, and that's exactly what they allow the Blackhawks to do. Donato scores to bring it to within 1, then it is Johnson who brings it to within 2 as we then head into the third period, where the Blackhawks are just pretty much dominant in that final frame to not only bring it to within 1, but then with the goaltender pulled, tie up the game at 4. In overtime, it only takes a mere few seconds, with the Sharks not even managing to touch the puck one time before the Blackhawks get the overtime game winner to win it 5-4 and send the Sharks, not technically home because they already are, but send the Sharks back to the dressing room with disappointment on their faces. Moving on to the players to talk about, yes, a comeback loss here is quite disappointing, and as I mentioned 5 years ago, I probably wouldn't have talked about any of these players because it would have just been a really bitter taste in our mouths to talk about such a disappointing type of loss. But these days, the Sharks technically they played an okay game for the first half of it at least, so it kind of bears mentioning how some of these players did perform. And let's start off with the top line of Zetterlund, Granlund, and Kostin. Now, the good news, Zetterlund scores 2 goals. That actually includes his 20th of the season, which is quite nice to see. Remember, this was a player that the Sharks traded for in the Timo Meier deal at the trade deadline last season, and in the 20 or so games that he played with the Sharks after that trade, he scored a grand total of 0 goals. So to see him be this 20-goal scorer for the San Jose Sharks, the leading goal scorer for the team, is quite nice. On the other hand, though, this line really wasn't all that great. Kostin was extremely muted, much more than you would normally expect. He's the type of player that doesn't necessarily appear a ton. He's not exceptionally apparent, what I'm trying to say. But here tonight, it was even lower than before. And then when it comes to both Zetterlund and Granlund, both of these players found themselves on the ice for every single one of these Chicago Blackhawks goals, rocking the sweet -4s on the night, which is obviously not a very good look. Defensively, things were struggling when it comes to this top line. Just not a lot of care taken to that part of the game. It felt as though once the Sharks went up 4-0, a lot of that went out of the window. When it comes to the second line, we have Barabanov with Kunin and Zadina. I haven't been particularly hyped up about this second line recently over these last couple of games, even when it was Eklund in position here on the center with Kunin and Zadina as his wingers instead. That was not very good. But here tonight, there was actually some jump, and that is primarily due to the fact that I thought Barabanov actually had a very effective game in the offensive zone, was setting up some really solid chances, even got himself a couple of really, really close calls. And while he would not manage to score in this game, nor even contribute to a goal in this game, I actually thought Barabanov was one of the better forwards for the San Jose Sharks. When it comes to the 2 other players on this line, Zadina would actually end up getting demoted off of this second line, which I was slightly surprised about, because while I don't think Zadina was as good as Barabanov in the early parts of this game, I do still think he was better than Kunin, so I would have personally demoted Kunin, but I could technically understand why that Zadina demotion does happen, as it ends up sort of doubling more so as a promotion to William Eklund, and perhaps you wanted to keep Kunin as the center position on that line, considering Eklund has thrived in the winger position over these last couple of games. So I do see where David Quinn is coming from here. And the change I don't necessarily think was necessary, but was a fine change otherwise. When it comes to the third line, we have Bailey, Sturm, and Bordeleau. This is a line that, unlike with the second line, I have been quite hyped up about over these past few games. It was only a matter of time, I feel like, where Bordeleau managed to break through and actually get a goal here at even strength with the team, as previously, even including the first goal of this game, all of them have come on the power play. Finally gets this even strength goal, which was quite nice to see. Really good night for Thomas Bordeleau. Ended up being one of, if not the best forward for the San Jose Sharks once again. When it comes to the other winger on this line, Justin Bailey, he's been the player who I've been less excited about on this third line. I've always felt as though he's played kind of third wheel, just not generally managing to keep up with both Sturm and Bordeleau, who have been rather good recently. But here tonight, that does change my tune. Bailey actually had one of his better games that we have seen from him over the last couple of weeks, if not couple of months at this point. So that was quite nice to see, finally looking like a really effective third line for the San Jose Sharks. And then when it comes to the fourth line, as I mentioned, Eklund ended up getting a promotion up to the second line. He was doing some pretty good things on this fourth line, and honestly doing it kind of single-handedly, as neither Carpenter or McDonald really managed to leave much of a mark on this game, at least I personally felt like. Once he got bumped up to that second line, he still had a couple of solid shifts. Meanwhile, Zadina, once he got bumped down to the fourth line, you didn't really notice him all that much, if he even got a couple of shifts at all. Then we get to the defensive side of things, where we have Ferraro and Burrows, and you would expect that with the collapse of the San Jose Sharks in this game, that many of these defensemen would not have necessarily had the best of games, and this is somewhat true. When it comes to Ferraro and Burrows, I thought they started this game off really well, which is, it exactly tracks with how this game went. The Sharks were dominating the first period, so you would expect that the defense would also be dominating. The major issue for these two players was their defense in the last minute of this game. The fact that the Sharks have a couple of players covering Philip Kurashev here, and they're not able to actually stop him from getting this game-tying goal is really the major difference maker on the night. These are the types of plays that you look at a playoff team and they would find a way to get this done, but then you look at the last place San Jose Sharks 2v1 against a player who, no offense to Kurashev, is not necessarily some elite type of talent in the NHL, and yet they're unable to prevent him. It's not a Ferraro and Burroughs thing. I think it was Ferraro and Granlund in that situation, but it is one of these two defensemen. They're just not able to stop him from scoring. That's really the major difference maker between the San Jose Sharks and so many of the other teams in the NHL. So while this was a pretty good night for these two players, it's far from perfect. When it comes to the second pairing here, Ruda and Thrun, there's a bit of a worry just taking a look at the scoreboard, especially with how recently these two players have been playing. They have not been good over these last few games mostly. Last game was not too bad, but the game before that was completely awful. But here tonight, actually not at fault mostly. In fact, I actually thought both Ruda and Thrun, but particularly Ruda, stood out in a very positive light. In the early parts of this game, I thought Thrun was really all over the ice in the good sense, not in the bad sense. I thought he was doing some pretty solid things offensively. However, as the game wore on, a lot of his offensive outputs started to be kind of liability. He has the issue of where he'll jump into the rush for like a 4-on-2 type of chance very aggressively, but in certain situations where the rest of the players aren't really or any of the forwards aren't really ready to cover his spot at the blue line, which means it could, if turned over, result in a 2-on-1 going the other way. They actually got punished for that one time here tonight, but there have been many other times tonight and in previous games where the Sharks would have had the ability to be punished, but it ends up not being the end of the world. So that's always a dangerous play for Thrun, something that I would expect and hope for him to be able to clean up, but I'd say generally it was a pretty good game for him, and Ruda I thought was even better than Thrun, making some solid plays defensively as well. The major issue, as per usual, does come with the Sharks' third defensive pairing. I mean, I'm just at the complete end of my rope when it comes to Calen Addison. There really isn't that much to say. Once again, it is another game in which Calen Addison, you look at for instance, the Donato goal, which actually got the comeback started for the Chicago Blackhawks. Addison just unable to win the battle here against Donato in front of the net. And I would like to remind people that Donato is a former San Jose Sharks. He was on the team a couple of years ago. And one of the major reasons, even though he was relatively skilled and could have been a decent bottom six forward for the San Jose Sharks, one of the reasons that he was let go is that they felt as though he just wasn't strong enough in front of the net, that he could find himself in the good areas, but he couldn't win the battles that would allow him to score those goals. And so to see him doing that, and it to come against Calen Addison, which is not a surprise at all, is kind of a bit of sweet irony when it comes to the San Jose Sharks here. And just Addison, yet another bad game. There really isn't that much to say about that. And while Vlasic was not nearly as bad as his defensive partner, there aren't really any positives to say about him either. And then we get to the goaltender for the Sharks, Devin Cooley. I thought Blackwood would get the start here tonight against Chicago, but instead they go back with Cooley. This is his second start in the NHL, both times coming against this very same Chicago Blackhawks team. This is also his first start in San Jose, which is where he grew up, or at least in the area. He has this whole nice story of being on the junior Sharks, his dream to play for the San Jose Sharks. He's finally arrived here as they picked him up at the deadline from the Buffalo Sabres a couple of weeks ago. His family in the audience. This game starts off so well for him. He's up 4-0. He's making some really nice saves. He had some great saves on Connor Bedard, who is far and away the best player on the Chicago Blackhawks. But when it came to some of the other players making those saves on, not nearly as good, as a couple of these goals are ones that just beat him clean and are, I won't say unacceptable, but aren't necessarily the best of looks. And this is probably the only reason for why this game is definitely somewhat depressing. It is great for the San Jose Sharks to lose this game for their standings position, and in 2 years from now, we likely will not remember this situation and will instead look back and say, good thing the Sharks lost to Chicago there because they got the first overall pick or something along those lines. But here tonight, it was definitely sad to see his mom in the stands, somewhat tearing up a bit. The fact that Devin Cooley's first career win sort of dematerialized in front of him as the Sharks continuously gave up goal after goal and chance after chance to eventually indeed lose this one in overtime. So slightly depressing there, but we move on. And that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on, I believe, Monday or Tuesday, as they'll get right back into it. And at this point, it is the final stretch here of the season, if you can really call it that. A dozen games left, 12 games left. They can win a couple of games. There is a bit of a cushion there now with this overtime loss to Chicago. They're 5 points behind, but you do still have to be a bit careful. The Sharks, they only have a singular win in March currently, so it's not as though with their recent play you're expecting much of a turnaround, but you never know, and you want the Sharks to kind of stay off the 8 ball, so to speak, and finish up this season not strong so that they can indeed keep this last place spot and so that all these losses were not in vain. Class dismissed.